Thank you, Christina. Our next speaker is Professor John Tofik Karam from DePaul University. Professor Karam is a core faculty member in the Latin American and Latino Studies program at DePaul. His research and teaching interests are ethnicity, nationalism, globalization, Brazil, and what he calls the Arab Americas. His book, Another Arabesque, Syrian-Lebanese Ethnicity in Neoliberal Brazil, won the 2007 Arab American National Museum Book Award in the nonfiction category, as well as the 2008 Brazilian Study Association's Roberto Reis Award. He has many articles appearing in a variety of journals, and currently is carrying out research on post-9/11 cross-border mobilizations organized and supported by Arab immigrants in the border region between Brazil, Paraguay, and Argentina. His talk today is entitled Arab Studies Through Diasporic Eyes, Philip Hitti and the AUB Alumni Network in Brazil. Professor Karam.
I want to extend my profound thanks to the Center for Contemporary Arab Studies for this opportunity to hear such wonderful work that's cutting across Africa, the Americas, Asia, the Arab world, Europe. I think what we all have in common really is we're all working the borders of Middle East studies. We're all challenging the borders of Middle East studies, and what's wonderful for me at least is hearing that we're not alone in the Americas. I might not know, have a profound understanding of the disciplines where people are coming from or the regions where people are working in, but what I do know, I think we all understand where each other are coming from in terms of speaking from different peripheries in relation to Middle East studies, and hopefully we're going to be able to rewire, if you will, Middle East studies by showing the significance of these us who work in the peripheries. I promise 20 minutes. You could kick me off the stage if.
I'm not a border policeman.
In 1951, Philip Hitti gave a series of talks to re-inaugurate Arab studies at the Universidade de São Paulo, the University of São Paulo, the premier university of Brazil. This is 1951. A few years earlier, the book that he's probably most well known for, in terms of public, The Arabs, A Short History for Americans, it had been translated into Portuguese and it was released for a Brazilian public. Yet Hitti was not only received as a Princeton University professor who wrote a book on Arabs. Some Brazilians of Syrian or Lebanese origins also knew Hitti as a fellow alumnus of the Syrian Protestant College, or the American University, what became the American University of Beirut. In fact, AUB alumni in São Paulo had sponsored Hitti's first trip to Brazil 25 years earlier, when Hitti had first urged them to build an academic program to study the Arab world. Upon his return in 1951, AUB alumni and others credited Hitti with the very idea to create Arab studies in Brazil. So the question that the paper begins with is, what does it mean that Hitti, the father, the quote-unquote father of Middle East studies in the U.S., participated in initiatives to establish the linguistic and historical study of the Arab world in Brazil? Among the hundreds of Syrian Protestant college graduates who moved from Syria to the Americas between the 1880s and the 1920s, my paper focuses on Hitti and AUB alumni in Brazil as constitutive, rather than simply derivative of Arab or Middle East origins, right? They didn't come, they came from a region that was fairly amorphous in terms of trying to define the region itself. I ask, how did these diasporic men of letters, they were principally men, relate to emergent area studies projects? I focus on Hitti's visits to São Paulo in 1925 and 1951. And I examine how AUB alumni and other academics sought to define the study of an amorphous area of the world that they identified as their common point of origin. In post-World War I and post-World War II times, this diaspora in the Americas positioned itself at the forefront of building knowledge about the Middle East or the Arab world. While Hitti used U.S. government funding in order to do so at Princeton, his counterparts in São Paulo struggled to establish and reestablish an akin program. Whether flourishing or faltering, these initiatives show that diaspora is implicated in and not separate from area studies. My focus on the historical interaction between diaspora and area studies diverges somewhat from a lot that has been written on, a lot that has been said about diaspora and area studies. Earlier scholarship viewed the idea of diaspora as disrupting the paradigm of area studies. Later work tended to conceptualize diaspora as part of a wider agenda to chart alternative regional geographies. I affirm that both approaches to diaspora and area studies overlook their actual history of mutual interaction, right? These things can't be theorized separately or conceptualized separately, only separately because there's a historical intersection. The more than 3-decade-long relationship between Hitti and AUB alumni in Brazil demonstrate that diasporic men of letters aspired to produce and shape knowledge about a region whose very boundaries were in flux during post-World War I and post-World War II times. Situated in both the U.S. and Brazil, diasporic graduates of the Syrian Protestant College, or AUB, conscientiously sought to create and maintain programs to study the Middle East or the Arab world. In doing so, these alumni engaged with, of course, imperial powers, distinct imperial powers that permeated such area studies. As shown by Ensing Ho, diasporas and empires share long histories of interaction over extensive geographies. Hitti built Middle East studies at Princeton University through U.S. power, while fellow alumni, AUB alumni and others in São Paulo, reinforced this imperial rise by crediting the U.S.-based Hitti with starting Arab studies in Brazil, on the one hand. Yet AUB alumni and others at USP also incorporated, and when I say USP, I'm sorry, USP is the acronym for the University of São Paulo. It's referred to as USP, and people who study or teach there are USPianos. Sometimes, I think by others, they're usually referred to that. So AUB alumni and others at USP, at the University of São Paulo, also incorporated into their program on Arabs and Islam the widespread belief in Brazil that Portuguese imperialism, and thus the country's own past, was shaped by the long presence of Arabs and Muslims on the Iberian Peninsula. So while Hitti's project for area studies was shaped by growing U.S. power, his fellow alumni at the University of São Paulo planned an akin program marked by the Portuguese imperial past, or Portuguese imperial nostalgia, perhaps. Through diasporic eyes, the study of an area, thought to be given or natural, is revealed to be historically contingent upon distinct imperial histories, showing that Middle East or Arab studies were constructed differently between the U.S. and Brazil. So my point isn't somehow that the study of the Arab world or the Middle East is somehow more egalitarian in Brazil than it is more hierarchical in the U.S. and more egalitarian. Both kinds of area studies are shaped by imperial histories, but by distinct imperial histories. Now, there are 3 parts to the longer version of the paper that I'm not going to present on. First part, I provide some biographies of 5 AUB alumni in Brazil, as well as that of Philip Hitti in the U.S., in order to show how their education at the Syrian Protestant College contributed to the vision, their shared vision, really, of themselves as harbingers of modernity to their people. Now, whether choosing to migrate or being sent abroad for medical training, AUB alumni cultivated these and other sentiments across the Americas, many times long-distance national sentiments as well. So that's the first part of the paper, about 6 biographies. In the second part of the paper, I trace their exchanges in post-World War I and interwar periods, starting with the 1922 founding of the Associação dos Ex-Alunos da Universidade Americana de Beirute, of the Alumni Association of the American University of Beirut, founded in São Paulo in 1922 by Nemi Jaffer, and the Jaffer Memorial Library, right, at AUB is named after his family. It was during these periods that the teaching of the Arabic language and literature began at USP, and I explored the dynamics that led to its temporary rise and fall. Now, in the third and final part that I'll present today, I discuss how AUB alumni mobilized with others in yet a second attempt, a second initiative to reestablish the study of the Arab world at the University of São Paulo. And I begin with a 1946 letter from an AUB alumni in São Paulo to Philip Hitti. In early 1946, Dr. Wajid Safaji began one of his letters to Philip Hitti by apologizing for the long time that had passed since his last correspondence. Safaji had earned his medical degree from AUB in 1920 and soon after migrated to Brazil. He was part of the welcoming party during Hitti's first visit to São Paulo in 1925 and was part of an earlier initiative to establish an Arabic language chair at the University of São Paulo. In his letter, Wajid asked the Princeton University professor to meet with Dr. Jorge Americano, then the rector of the University of São Paulo, who was touring U.S. university campuses to gather ideas about programming and curricula. Wajid Safaji twice stated that Americano, his last name was Americano, that Americano was, quote, a great Brazilian friend of the Arabs and our culture, and he emphasized that the University of São Paulo rector had previously, quote, presided over the solemn installation of the Arabic chair in São Paulo, end quote. Now, Wajid Safaji failed to mention that the chair was vacated soon after, that it was actually a failed attempt to establish the study of Arabic language and culture at USP. But he then requested Hitti he requested that Hitti ask, quote, Arab entities and centers in Washington and New York, and he was here referring to the Institute of Arab American Affairs that had been opened by Hitti himself a few years before, to enter into direct relations with the rector. Wajid's 1946 letter shows that an AUB alumnus in São Paulo appealed to Hitti, by then the foremost scholar of Arab and Islamic studies in the U.S., in his efforts to impart new ideas about such curricula to an influential Brazilian university official. I don't know what happened. But what I do know is that Wajid Safaji also used Hitti's prominence in relation to another prominent Brazilian university figure. His name is Eurípides Simões de Paula, and he was a key figure in the then recently inaugurated, basically the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences of the University of São Paulo, the Faculdade de Filosofia, Ciência e Letras. So Safaji and Hitti allegedly proposed the reestablishment of Arab studies in Brazil to Simões de Paula, the director or the dean, if you will, of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences at USP, around the same time that he actually became the dean or the director. Their ideas were warmly received because Simões de Paula viewed the quote-unquote history of civilizations, including the quote specific areas for the study of language and culture, as the backbone of a Brazilian national university system. As part of this larger vision, Simões de Paula became a driving force to create curricula in Middle Eastern and other area studies at USP. After gaining authorization to reestablish curricula and an endowed chair, Simões de Paula invited Hitti to give several talks to reinaugurate the program at USP in August of 1951. So, in the initial ceremony, Simões de Paula, he stated that, quote, the talks to be given by Dr. Hitti are an auspicious opening for the new program of what he called of Oriental Letters, which would have specialized professors, according to him, grant diplomas, and be an equal footing with other units at USP. He outlined the program's courses, including Arabic and Ancient Hebrew, the history of Arab civilization, Arabic and biblical archaeology, as well as quote-unquote Portuguese philology. The inclusion of a Portuguese course within an Arabic letters program was a nod to an earlier attempt to establish the study of Arabic language and literature at USP, but it also related to Simões de Paula's own vision for studying areas. In his book, in one of his books, Marrocos e suas relações com a Ibéria na Antiguidade, Morocco and its relations with Iberia in antiquity, in ancient times, Simões de Paula highlighted the quote-unquote links between Iberia and North Africa as, quote, one of the facets of our Brazilian national history. Though not referenced during the speech, Simões de Paula's his main intellectual interlocutor was Gilberto Freire, In Casa Grande e Senzala, Gilberto Freire is kind of this Brazilian national ideologue, if you will. In one of his most famous works, Freire most famously argued that the legacy of the quote-unquote Moors in Iberia shaped how Portuguese colonized Brazil. Accordingly, in Simões de Paula's vision, an Arabic studies program in Brazil would logically include Portuguese-speaking Iberia and its interplay with Arabic-speaking North Africa. So while Middle East area studies in the U.S. cast Iberia as the setting of the rise and fall, generally speaking, conventionally speaking, the rise and fall of Muslim and Arab civilization between the 8th and 15th centuries, roughly the same region was framed by Brazilian academics in terms of their own colonial history and national language. So this shows that the initiative to institutionalize Middle East as well as other area studies in Brazil took shape in relation to a Portuguese imperial past. The study of an area, often thought to be universal, actually carries particular and distinct meanings between the U.S. and Brazil. After Simões de Paula, after he gave his opening speech, the student union president, José Restel, took the podium. It was a Brazilian of ostensibly German descent. He remembered that from 1943 to 1950, he and others within the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences at USP, including Safaji's younger brother, Jamil Safaji, who had died in 1950, they had, quote-unquote, fought for courses in Arab civilization. In fact, they characterized, he himself, Restel, who wasn't Arab Brazilian, characterized this period as the campaign for Arab studies at USP. And Restel noted that those involved in the campaign did nothing more than germinate the idea introduced by Professor Hitti when he visited São Paulo in 1925. And the student union president concluded saying, you know, I hope this begins a new era, a new era in the study of the Arab world at USP. For the next few weeks in August 1951, Philip Hitti, he gave 8 talks, half of which focused on quote-unquote Arab contributions to the West in terms of literature, philosophy, science, and art. But Hitti actually rarely mentioned the West as such, as implied by the title of his inaugural talk, Arab Contributions to Western Civilization, especially to the Iberian Peninsula. Hitti frequently made reference to Iberia and how Arabs and Islam shaped it for nearly 1,000 years. The Princeton University professor invoked the Arabic translations of King Alfonso X of Castile and the literature of the Moriscos, the treatise on surgery by El-Zarahiwi, who died in Cordoba, and the philosophical oeuvres and translations of Ibn Rushd, as well as the architecture, calligraphy, and colored ceramic tiles that remained long after Muslims were forcibly exiled by the Spanish crown in the early 1600s. Of course, Hitti dedicated a chapter to this Muslim and Arab history of Iberia in his The Arabs, A Short History for Americans. I actually have a copy of the book that I might do a show and tell afterwards if there's time. When in 1948 the book was translated from English to Portuguese and released in Brazil under the title Os Árabes, because the original title of the book was For Americans, literally, that was dropped eventually. The chapter on Iberia, of course, remained, but it was in a fairly minor form. More than he had done in any of his books, Hitti repeatedly referenced this Iberian history of Muslims and Arabs in the context of an Arab and Brazilian audience who would be especially interested in hearing how the one-time imperial power that colonized their country was itself shaped by Islam and Arabs. Hitti gave his last talk at the University of São Paulo's College of Law, attended by Syrian, Lebanese, and U.S. diplomats, and many others as well. When he finished, a university official by the name of Paulo Sawaya took the floor. Sawaya didn't enter into his family details, but he was the son of Lebanese immigrants who arrived in Brazil in the 1890s. He was trained by French professors, which was the first generation of professors at USP, at the University of São Paulo. Sawaya earned his degree in medicine from USP, began teaching there in 1937, eventually became the dean of the College of Arts and Sciences as well. At the time, I think he was vice director of the college. Sawaya, though, didn't speak as an academic. According to Wajid Safaji, who related the event and who quoted Sawaya's speech, Sawaya first actually addressed Hitti in Arabic, calling him one of Lebanon's distinguished sons and a propagator of Arab culture who, quote-unquote, illuminates our cultural renaissance for American peoples. Sawaya continued that Arabs are, quote, an integrated part of Brazil, and being so, their meeting with another Arab from the United States has no equivalent in any other part of Arab immigration in the Americas. So Sawaya then stated, talking to Philip Hitti, this, your second trip to Brazil, is a natural consequence of the first one in 1925 when you planted the idea of Arab studies in São Paulo. The idea was strengthened in 1940 when in the magazine El Uzbek, the League of Andalusian Letters that was published in São Paulo, you insisted for us to institutionalize Arab studies at the University of São Paulo. That idea grew and flourished among students, and your idea, illustrious Dr. Hitti, is now a consummated fact. Sawaya, as the future director or dean of the College of Arts and Sciences and himself of Lebanese origins, credited Hitti with planting the idea of Arab studies in Brazil. Now, there were AUB alumni present at the second encounter at USP, but the dynamic that they helped give rise to already continued on its own. There are some examples of AUB alumni doing other things, but let me conclude by stating that the Arabic language chair that was to be the centerpiece of Arab studies at USP actually remained vacant for the next decade. So this second attempt to establish Arab studies at USP as well, unsuccessful. Until 1960, with the signing of a cultural accord between Brazilian President Jânio Quadros and Egypt's Gamal Abdel Nasser. It was this accord that gave rise to USP's current graduate program in Arab language, literature, and culture. And I want to stress that this is the word that's used, right? It's not Arabico, right? It's Arabi. So it's programa, it's the programa in Lingua, Literatura y Cultura Árabe. So it's Arab language, literature, and culture. And this was established in 1960, and it continues, it's only grown till today. But that being said, then, so these post-World War I, post-World War II exchanges, people have the right to ask, of course, well, what's their significance? If actually the origins of this Arab Studies department at USP, the origins really, we can't trace them to these earlier exchanges. My paper maintains that whether failing or succeeding, they demonstrate that diaspora is historically implicated in area studies and not, as many have implied, separate from it. Early 20th century AUB alumni who migrated to both the US and Brazil envisioned themselves at the forefront of building knowledge about a world space with fluid boundaries, in helping to constitute the very region whence they stemmed over the course of 3 decades. Hitti and the AUB alumni network in Brazil revealed to us today that other configurations of area studies outside of the US-American context were and perhaps still are possible through distinct, not despite, but through distinct imperial formations. Although Middle East studies in the U.S. was both enabled and limited by growing U.S. power during and after World War II, the idea of Arab studies in Brazil took shape in akin ways through Portuguese imperial nostalgia. In interacting with empires across time and space, diasporas have much to tell us about the areas of the Middle East or the Arab world whose boundaries we still so often take for granted. Thank you.